The sky turned to rust. I was stationed at the Hellespont Orbital Array, a glorified traffic cop for the shipping lanes above New Carthage. My official title was Cargo Routing Specialist, 3rd Class, which meant I spent my 12-hour shifts staring at a screen, making sure grain freighters from the outer agri-worlds didn't slam into luxury liners from the core. It was the most boring job in the Terran Navy, and I was the most boring person to have it. I liked it that way. My wife, Ilara, would send me hollows of the kids from the surface. They'd be playing in the backyard, chasing the Lightorb drones, their laughter crackling through the cheap speakers on my terminal. The feeds were always a little laggy, a little grainy, but they were my only connection to the world I was supposed to be defending. I'd tap the screen, a silent "I love you," and wait for her delayed smile to flicker back. The array was a massive, ungainly structure, all struts and solar panels, spinning slowly over the planet's terminator. The view was always the same, the brilliant, jewel-toned curve of New Carthage below, the absolute, unblinking blackness of space above, and the occasional, predictable blip of a cargo ship on the long-range scanners. That night, the blips started to multiply. I just poured myself a cup of lukewarm synth coffee from the machine in the corner, the stuff that tastes like burnt plastic and regret when I noticed it. A cluster of contacts at the edge of the system. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a sensor ghost, a glitch in the old hardware, but the count kept climbing. 10, 50, 100. "Command, this is Hellespont," I said, keying my mic. "I'm getting some unusual returns on the long-range LiDAR. Could be a debris field, but the signature's all wrong, too coherent." There was a long, crackling silence. I could practically hear the board officer on the other end rolling his eyes. "Hellespont, this is Command. We see it. Probably just a comms buoy network deploying. Stay frosty." I didn't feel frosty. I felt a cold knot of dread forming in my gut. The contacts weren't just in a line, they were forming up, a geometric pattern that was too deliberate, too purposeful. I zoomed in on the data, my fingers trembling slightly as I tapped the console. The ship profiles were wrong. They weren't the blocky, utilitarian shapes of our freighters or the sleek, predatory lines of our military vessels. They were organic, almost crystalline, like obsidian shards that had been sharpened by a god. The proximity alarm began to whine, a low, mournful sound that was supposed to warn of a collision risk. I looked at the display. The unknown fleet was already in the middle of our shipping lanes, the lanes I was responsible for. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Command, this is Hellespont. These aren't buoys. They're moving into high-traffic corridors. Permission to send a warning to civilian traffic." "Negative, Hellespont. Maintain radio silence. We are attempting to." The transmission was cut off by a deafening burst of static. I looked back at the hollow of my kids, frozen mid-laugh, their faces bathed in the pale, sterile light of the bridge. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I'd see them in that way. That was the last moment of peace I'd ever know. The first shot wasn't a flash, not in the traditional sense. It was a ripple in space itself, a distortion that I felt more than saw, like a sudden drop in pressure right before a storm breaks. The main orbital defense platform, a monster of a thing armed with enough kinetic rods to crack a continent, just vanished. One moment it was there, a faint glint of metal against the stars. The next, it was a brilliant, expanding cloud of glittering dust, lit from within by the dying fires of its fusion core. "All hands, this is not a drill," a new voice screamed over the comms, panicked and raw. It was Admiral Vance, the hard-nosed commander of the home fleet. I'd only ever seen her in official broadcasts, always so composed, so stoic. Now she sounded like a terrified grandmother. "We have confirmed hostile contact. This is a full-scale planetary invasion. All military vessels scramble, all non-essential personnel to the shelters." I sat frozen in my chair, watching the numbers on my tactical display climb with sickening speed. It wasn't 100 contacts anymore. It was 1,000. The system was swimming with them. They were like a plague of locusts, spreading out, their crystalline hulls gleaming with an alien, malevolent light. My job was to track cargo ships. There was nothing for me to do. I was a librarian in the middle of a shooting war. I flipped through the feeds, desperately trying to find something, anything. Civilian channels were a mess of screaming and crying. A luxury liner had been cut in half, its passengers spilling out into the void, their emergency suits flickering like dying fireflies. An agri-freighter, its holds filled with grain, was burning, its hull glowing cherry red as it spun out of control. I saw one of our own frigates, the Valiant, try to make a stand. It got off one volley, a few impotent plasma bolts that splashed harmlessly off the enemy shields before one of the crystalline ships touched it. It simply peeled the Valiant apart, layer by layer, like you or I would peel an orange. The screams of its crew were the last thing I heard on that frequency before it went dead. Panic was a physical thing now, a cold liquid that had replaced the blood in my veins. I wanted to scream, to curl into a ball, to run. But there was nowhere to run. I could see the enemy closing in on the planet. They weren't just attacking military targets. They were targeting the cities. The lights of New Carthage's capital, a beautiful, sprawling metropolis, were being extinguished one by one, each one a city block, a suburb, a life. I watched my hometown burn. I saw the smoke plumes from orbit, ghostly gray fingers reaching into the upper atmosphere. My home, Ilara, the kids, they were down there. The sensor maps were a mess of static and debris, but I could see the massive alien ships descending, their shadows falling over the surface like the hands of death itself. The enemy wasn't just an invasion force, it was an extinction event. And we were powerless to stop it. The might of the Terran Navy, the force that was supposed to protect our species, was being torn apart. I saw our dreadnoughts, the pride of the fleet, the ships that could level moons, just crumple. Their shields, which were supposed to be the most advanced in the known galaxy, shattered in moments. They were outclassed, outgunned, and outnumbered. It was a massacre. The comms network was a graveyard. Only the occasional desperate cry broke the silence. A frigate calling for reinforcements that would never come. A civilian pilot screaming for his wife as his ship depressurized. A Marine unit, their transmission laced with static and gunfire, shouting that they were going to fight them in the streets, street by street. Then, silence. Then a new frequency crackled to life. It was encrypted, military grade, but the encryption was damaged, bleeding through onto open channels. It was Admiral Vance again, but her voice was different. It was quiet, measured, but carried a weight of finality that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "This is Admiral Vance to all surviving Terran vessels," she said, her voice sounding as cold and sharp as the edge of a knife. "The battle is lost. The defense of our planetary holdings is no longer possible." A wave of despair washed over me, so strong I almost threw up. She was surrendering. "However," she continued, and the single word was like a spark in the darkness, "the battle for our species is not. We have identified a weakness in their command and control structure. We have 15 minutes. For any ship that still has a functioning FTL drive, this is your final order." There was a pregnant pause, filled only by the crackle of static and the distant, muffled thuds of explosions. "We are going to ram them." A stunned silence fell over the comms. Ram them? It was suicide, it was madness. "All ships," Vance's voice was almost a whisper now, but it cut through the chaos of the open channel. "Set a collision course for the nearest enemy dreadnought. We will show them what it means to fight a human being." And just like that, the ghost fleet that had been running, hiding, and screaming found a purpose. A quiet, terrible purpose. It wasn't about winning. It was about sending a message. From my post, I watched them do it. Dozens of ships, from tiny corvettes to battered cruisers, their hulls still glowing with the heat of their earlier battles, turned to face the alien juggernauts. They weren't firing their weapons anymore. Their weapons were their ships. I saw a tiny patrol boat, barely larger than a shuttle. streaked towards a massive alien carrier, its engines burning at maximum. It didn't even explode. It just merged with the carrier's shimmering hull, a small, insignificant blemish that was quickly erased. But it was followed by another and another. They were kamikazes, their crews singing out over the open comms, a mixture of hymns, battle cries, and final goodbyes to the families on the world below. It was the most horrifyingly beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The mad, desperate courage of it was awe-inspiring. It didn't matter that their weapons were useless. They still found a way to hurt the enemy. They still found a way to fight. The enemy, for the first time, seemed to falter. The relentless, orderly advance of their fleet became confused. They weren't just fighting a technologically inferior foe. They were fighting a species that was willing to sacrifice everything, down to its last ship, to make them bleed. I sat there, a useless cargo router, watching the death of my world and the rebirth of my species in the same horrible moment. The first spark of defiance had been lit, and it was that spark that would change everything. The order to ram was a death sentence, a final, defiant scream into the void. And in the chaos of those final, frantic minutes, I was utterly, completely alone. The Hellespont array was a non-combatant, a skeleton of struts and antennas. It had no engines, no weapons, and the only thing on board that even vaguely resembled a defense system was a safety laser for vaporizing micrometeorites. I was a passenger on a sinking ship, watching a planet die. My console flickered, overloaded with a cascade of gibberish data. Then one feed came through, crystal clear, a tactical map of the new Carthage system. It was already outdated, but it showed what was left. Red dots representing Terran vessels were blinking out one by one, their faint glows extinguished by the overwhelming mass of the enemy's blue-white icons. But I noticed something. Our suicide runs were working. Not by killing the enemy. Their ships were too massive, too strong for our little ships to destroy. They were working by creating chaos. The shockwaves from the imploding fusion cores, the sheer mass of a ramming destroyer, the frantic maneuvering of the enemy to avoid the mad, screeching Terran projectiles, it had shattered their formation. They weren't advancing in a single, unstoppable wave anymore. They were reacting. They were panicking. My old training kicked in, a dusty protocol I'd learned in a simulation years ago and filed away as utterly useless. It was called the Rook's Gambit, a contingency plan for a complete and total rout. The idea was that in the event of a catastrophic military loss, any surviving military or civilian asset with an operable FTL drive was to make best speed to the nearest, quiet zone, a designated, off-the-grid rendezvous point for the remnants of the fleet. The closest one was a gas giant, a churning ball of purple and orange called Chronos, at the edge of the system. A survivor's rally point, a place to take a final stand, or a place to die together. I saw a single green blip on my tactical screen, a little icon representing a Terran vessel that had somehow made it through the enemy lines. It was a corvette, a Gladius class, a small, fast, and heavily armed little ship meant for escort duty. It was racing towards the outer system, fleeing. I don't know why, but I patched into its frequency. "This is Hellespont Orbital Array to Unidentified Corvette," I said, my voice trembling. "Are you receiving? Do you need assistance?" A burst of static, then a gruff, exhausted voice replied, "This is the ISS Defiant. We're the last ones out. The only ones from the look of it." "I see you're heading out system," I said, my heart pounding. "You going to the Chronos rally point?" There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. "Rally point, is that what we're calling it?" the voice a man said with a bitter laugh. "Yeah, sure, we're going there, but we won't be the last. There are more. I just got a signal from a science vessel, the Copernicus. They were at a research station in the outer asteroid belt. They're running too. We're trying to get everyone together." My mind was racing. The Hellespont array was a sitting duck, but it had something the Defiant didn't, a massive, high-power comms array. I was the only one who could coordinate this. I was the only one who could bring the scattered survivors together. Corvette Defiant, this is Hellespont Actual, I said, my voice finding a strange, newfound steadiness. I'm a cargo routing specialist, but I am the only one on this station. I can coordinate the survivors. I can't do it from a ship, but I can do it from here. I need you to relay my coordinates to the Copernicus and any other survivor you can find. Tell them to come to me. Come to you? You're a non-combat station. You're not a rally point, you're a target. I'm the only one who can see the whole picture from here, I said, waving at my banks of consoles. I've got the sensor data, the tactical map. I can get everyone out. Just get them here, please. Another long silence. I could almost hear the man on the other end trying to process the sheer absurdity of my request. A glorified traffic controller turning himself into a fleet admiral. All right, Hellespont, he said, his voice grudgingly respectful. I'll put out the call. You're the only hope we've got left. The next hour was a blur. One by one, the surviving ships trickled in. They came in all shapes and sizes, battered and scarred. A civilian luxury liner, its hull scorched, its life support failing, carrying 3,000 terrified refugees. A grimy mining ship, its laser drills retrofitted as improvised weapons, packed to the gills with raw ore. A half-dozen scientific vessels, their scientists now acting as gunners, their telescopes turned into targeting arrays. A few more military ships like the Defiant, survivors from the slaughter. Each one had its own horror story. Each one had lost friends, family, a home. I worked like a madman, my fingers flying across the console, pulling up schematics for the ships, calculating their fuel reserves, their FTL capabilities, their holding capacities. I was jury-rigging an escape plan, a desperate gamble. The enemy was in the system. They were burning the planet. They'd eventually find us. Then an error message flashed across my screen. My blood ran cold. The FTL drives on most of the civilian ships were damaged. They were too slow. They wouldn't be able to make the jump to a safe haven. We were stuck. We can't run, the captain of the Copernicus, a thin, nervous woman named Dr. Aris Thorne, said over the comms. Our jump engines are shot. We were supposed to be testing a new star mapping array, not fleeing from an alien armada. We'll be a sitting duck. Same here, echoed the captain of the mining ship, a gruff old man named Captain Jax. My ship is a rock with an engine. We can barely hold formation, let alone jump. The fragile hope I'd built began to crumble. We were a fleet of 17 ships, 17 survivors from the greatest military disaster in human history, and we were trapped. We can't outrun them, I said, my voice echoing in the silent, smoke-filled control room. And we can't outfight them, but maybe we can make them not want to follow us. An idea was forming, a terrible, crazy, impossible idea. It was born from the only thing I knew, logistics. I've been analyzing the enemy's fleet movements, I said, pulling up the tactical data. Their ships operate in a strict hierarchical structure. They have command ships, and those command ships control everything else. Without them, the rest of the fleet is just blind. The captain of the Defiant was the first to understand. We can't kill them, he said, his voice a low growl. But we can slow them down. We can make them think we're leading them into a trap. We can make them suspicious. We didn't have enough firepower for an ambush, but we didn't need firepower. We needed confusion. The Chrono relays, I said, my mind blazing through the old protocols. The long-range comms buoys. They're littered throughout the system. If we can piggyback our emergency broadcast onto them, saturate the airwaves with fake orders, false data, simulated fleet movements. We can make them think there's a second fleet coming, Dr. Thorne said, her voice bright with sudden understanding. A reserve force, a trap. Exactly, I said. We don't have to beat them. We just have to make them doubt, make them wait, give ourselves time. The plan was insane. We had 17 ships, most of them unarmed, and a collection of malfunctioning comms buoys. But it was all we had, so we started to work. The Defiant used its superior sensors to map the enemy positions. The Copernicus began generating ghost signals, fake engine signatures that mimicked a massive fleet. The mining ship used its jury-rigged mining lasers to heat up an asteroid field, creating a false thermal bloom that looked like a shipyard. I sat in the center of it all, coordinating this symphony of deception. I was routing signals, prioritizing which buoys to use, cross-referencing the enemy's reactions. For the first time in my life, my job mattered. My entire existence as a cargo router was a preparation for this single, desperate moment. For a long, tense hour, nothing happened. We watched as the enemy fleet methodically incinerated New Carthage, its cities turning to ash and molten glass. We could only watch. Then a proximity alert blared. The alien fleet was changing course. They had seen our trap, and they were taking the bait. They were turning to face the Phantom fleet. "It's working," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "They're deploying to intercept nothing." The enemy formation shifted, their massive dreadnoughts moving to block the approach vector of our reserve fleet. The chaos of their earlier panic was gone, replaced by a cold, military precision, but it was focused on a threat that didn't exist. We were forgotten. We were a ghost, a distraction. For a moment the path was clear. A single, narrow window of opportunity, just for us. "All ships, this is Hellespont," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "The way is clear. Set your course for the Chronos rally point. Full burn. Initiate FTL as soon as you are clear of the gravity well." One by one, the 17 ships began to move. The Defiant took the lead, its sleek form cutting through the starry void. The Copernicus followed, then the damaged luxury liner, its passengers crowded at the viewports, a silent, terrified audience. The mining ship groaned and creaked as it turned, its engines sputtering. We were making it. We were actually making it. Then a scream from one of the civilian ships. "We have an engine malfunction. We can't break orbit. We're stuck." It was the Aurora, a passenger liner packed with refugees from the New Carthage suburbs. It was a floating death trap, unable to escape, and its distress signal was like a flare in the silent, black night. It would draw the enemy's attention back to us. "We can't leave them," the captain of the Defiant said. "They're civilians." "If we go back, we all die," Captain Jack said, his voice grim. "It's suicide." A terrible silence descended on the comms. We were facing the ultimate inhuman test, the safety of the few or the salvation of the many. I looked at my console, at the blip representing the Aurora, and the 16 other ships that were waiting for my order. My hand hovered over the abort button for the jump sequence. My mind was screaming, but I thought of Alara, of my kids. I thought of the faces I'd seen on the burning planet below. This is what we had to become if we wanted to survive. "We're going back," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "All of us. The human race doesn't leave its own behind. Not anymore. Not ever again." The decision to turn back was the hardest I've ever made. It was the moment I stopped being a scared traffic controller and became something else. It wasn't bravery. It was a cold, hard choice, a line drawn in the sand that we couldn't cross. Leaving the Aurora to die wasn't an option. It was the end of our humanity. And if we lost that, then the aliens had already won. The reaction was immediate. Some of the captains protested, their voices tight with fear. "They're a liability. We can't risk the whole fleet for one ship." But others, like the captain of the Defiant, simply said understood, and their ships began to turn. The mining ship, its engines groaning in protest, followed suit. One by one, the 17 ships reversed course, a tiny, fragile fleet of misfits flying back into the jaws of the beast. The enemy was distracted by our Phantom fleet, but not for long. Their advanced sensors would see through the ruse eventually. We had maybe minutes. I worked furiously, pulling up the schematics of the Aurora. The damage was critical. A cascade failure in its secondary power grid had locked its FTL drive. It was a ship with its legs broken, begging to be put down. "Aurora Actual, this is Hellespont," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, like I was talking a panicked driver through a docking procedure. I need you to shut down all non-essential systems. Divert all available power to your emergency thrusters. We're going to try and push you. Push us, a shaky voice replied. With what? A tugboat. With all of us, I said. Get your people to the rear of the ship, away from the hull. Brace for impact. The plan was absurd. It was a classic civilian salvage maneuver, something you used to nudge a runaway cargo container, not a crippled starliner. But it was the only plan we had. The 17 ships formed a loose formation around the Aurora. The Defiant took the lead, its powerful engines humming as it maneuvered into position. The mining ship, its hull a jagged mass of ore and metal, moved to the port side. 2 research vessels, their scientific probes and scanners now serving as makeshift grapples, locked onto the Aurora's hull. It was a delicate, terrifying ballet performed by amateurs under the nose of a colossal, sleeping predator. All ships on my mark, I said, watching the enemy's sensor data. The Phantom fleet was holding their attention, but their probes were starting to break away, scanning the area. They were getting suspicious. Engage thrusters at 10%. Gently, people. We're trying to fix it, not break it further. A low groan echoed through the comms as the ships pushed against the Aurora. The massive liner began to move, a painfully slow, ponderous drift. A few degrees, then 10. More, the Aurora captain yelled. We're picking up speed, keep pushing. All ships increase thrust to 30%, I ordered. The engines of the 17 ships roared, their power strained to the breaking point. The Aurora groaned in protest, metal screaming against metal, but it was moving. It was turning slowly, agonizingly, pointing its battered nose toward the edge of the system. I saw a flash on my tactical display. One of the enemy scout ships had broken off from the main fleet. It was heading straight for us. It was a sleek, crystalline shape, smaller than a dreadnought but still far larger than any of our ships, and it was fast. Contact, enemy scout bearing 179 Mark 5, I yelled. They've seen us. All ships break off the push, defensive positions. The Defiant was the first to respond. It unleashed a volley of plasma at the incoming scout, a desperate, futile gesture. The blast splashed harmlessly off its shimmering shields. We can't hurt it, the Defiant captain screamed. Our weapons are useless. The scout ship didn't even bother to return fire. It simply accelerated, its sleek form blurring towards us. It was going to ram us. It was going to cut us all in half. Then a burst of light erupted from the side of the scout ship. A massive spiraling beam of energy shot past us, a brilliant, angry red. I thought it was an attack, but it was coming from behind the scout. The beam hit the scout ship square in its flank, and its shields flared a brilliant, angry white before collapsing entirely. The energy beam punched through its hull like a hot knife through butter, and the ship exploded in a silent, brilliant fireball. I stared at my screen, stunned. A second beam lanced out from the same direction, this time hitting a cluster of enemy fighters that had broken off from the main fleet. They too were annihilated. What the hell was that? Someone yelled over the comms. I looked at my tactical map, trying to trace the source of the weapon. There was nothing there, just empty space. All ships, this is Hellespont, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm not picking up any weight. A single new contact had appeared on my display. It was massive, a huge, ungainly shape, nothing like the sleek, crystalline lines of the enemy. It was like a giant floating box, bristling with antennae and weapon mounts. It was a ship, but it was unlike any Terran vessel I'd ever seen. It was old, battered, and it looked like it was held together with hope and duct tape. Unknown vessel, this is the Hellespont orbital array, I said, my voice trembling. Identify yourself. We are survivors of the New Carthage attack. There was a long, crackling pause. Then a voice came over the comms, distorted by static but unmistakably human. It was old, weary, and carried a weight of unimaginable years. This is the ISS Ark Royal, the voice said. last of the old fleet, and I've come to take you home." The voice sent a shiver down my spine, the Ark Royal. It was a legend, a ghost story. The last of the pre-FTL ships, a generation ship that had left Earth centuries ago, long before humanity had discovered the jump drive. It was supposed to be a lost colony, a failed experiment, a footnote in history textbooks. But here it was. How are you here?" I stammered. "We followed the screaming," the old voice said, a profound sadness in his tone. "We watched your world burn from the edge of the system. Your radio waves reached our fleet months ago, but we were too far away. We saw your broadcasts, your music, your news. We watched you kill each other, but we also watched you love, laugh, and build. And now we watch you fight." The Ark Royal began to move, its massive engines glowing to life. It was heading straight for the enemy fleet. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "You'll be destroyed, they'll tear you apart." "Maybe," the voice said calmly. "But I've been waiting a long time for this, son. My people have been alone for 500 years. We thought we were the last. We thought humanity had died out. But you're still here. You're still fighting. You're all that's left. And I'll be damned if I let those shiny bastards extinguish the final spark of our species." The Ark Royal's hull began to glow, an eerie, pulsating orange. It wasn't shields or weapons. It was its engines. It was overloading them. "Get your ships out of here," the old voice commanded. "Head for the Kronos rally point. We'll hold them off as long as we can." "But you'll die," I screamed. "I'm already dead, son," the voice chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "I died a long time ago. Now let me do something useful with my ghost." I watched in horrified silence as the Ark Royal surged forward, a colossal beast of old metal and ancient courage. It was a final, defiant stand, a sacrifice that bought us the time we needed. The enemy fleet, distracted by this new, unexpected threat, turned their full attention to the ghost ship. "All ships, this is Hellespont," I said, my voice cracking. "Full burn to Kronos, now don't look back, go." The 17 ships, the Aurora now lurching along with the rest of us, fired their engines and fled. I kept my eyes glued to the tactical display, watching the Ark Royal's symbol. It was surrounded by enemy contacts. It was fighting. It was dying. The last transmission from the Ark Royal was a burst of static, followed by a single, distorted line of an old Earth song. I couldn't make out the words, but the melody was achingly familiar, a ghost from a time before we reached for the stars. Then the Ark Royal's icon vanished from my screen, replaced by a brilliant, expanding cloud of debris. They had taken our place. They had become the sacrifice that saved the 17. The jump to Kronos was a blur. I don't remember the calculations, the positioning, the sheer terror of the transition. All I remember is the silence, an awful, profound silence that descended on the fleet as we materialized in the orbit of the gas giant. We were safe. We were alive, but we were alone. Kronos was a magnificent, terrible place. A gas giant the color of a fresh bruise, its atmosphere a churning maelstrom of ammonia and hydrogen. Its immense gravity well was a natural barrier, making FTL jumps in or out difficult, but that's why it was chosen as a quiet zone. It was a hiding place, a fortress made of physics. The 17 ships entered the planet's orbit like a flock of battered, frightened birds. The Aurora, the luxury liner, was running on emergency power, its life support a faint whisper. The mining ship, the Rockhound, had its hull scorched and blackened from a near miss. The Defiant had lost a third of its crew, its corridors echoing with the cries of the wounded. We were a broken fleet, captained by terrified civilians and exhausted soldiers. I wasn't their leader. I was a cargo router who had been in the right place at the wrong time, but they looked to me for answers. They looked to me for a plan. It was a burden I never asked for and one I wasn't sure I could carry. "What's the plan, Hellespont?" Captain Jax of the Rockhound asked, his gruff voice echoing over the comms. His ship was a floating hulk, but his crew were tough, resourceful miners. They were survivors. We can't stay here forever. This planet is a dead end. We wait, I said, my voice hoarse from screaming orders. We assess our damage. We see if there are any other survivors. We come up with a way to get out of this system. There is no way out, Dr. Thorne from the Copernicus said, her voice laced with despair. Our FTL drives are damaged. Most of them are beyond repair. We're stranded. This is where the human race ends, in a museum of broken ships hiding from a bunch of shiny insects. A murmur of agreement rippled through the fleet. The morale was gone. We had survived the destruction of our world, but we couldn't survive the loss of hope. I looked at my console, at the faces of the people on the ships. The civilians on the Aurora were packed into the viewing decks, their faces pale and frightened. The crew of the Defiant were tending to their wounded, their faces grim and stoic. The scientists on the Copernicus were huddled around their consoles, their eyes wide with shock. We were all just waiting to die. But I couldn't accept that. I refused to. I remembered the Ark Royal, the ghost ship that had sacrificed itself for us. They had been alone for 500 years and they hadn't given up. They had come to help us, total strangers. They had shown us what it meant to be human. They had given us a chance. We are not dying here, I said, my voice gaining a sudden strength I didn't know I had. We are not the end. We have 17 ships. We have engineers, scientists, soldiers, and civilians. We have something they don't have. I paused, trying to find the right words. My eyes fell on a hollow of my family, frozen on my console. Ilera, the kids. We have a reason to fight, I said. We're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for the memory of everyone we lost. The millions on New Carthage, the crew of the Ark Royal. We are the final testament to their sacrifice, and we will make it count. The comms were silent for a long moment. Then a single, quiet voice spoke up. It was a young woman on the Aurora. Her face was streaked with tears. What do we do? It was a simple question. It was the question I had been asking myself since the sky turned to rust. But in that moment the answer came to me. It was a stupid, crazy, impossible answer, but it was the only one we had. We fight back, I said. Not with brute force. We can't beat them that way. We beat them with our minds. We outthink them. We use what we have. We took stock of our resources. It was a pathetic inventory. The Defiant was our only real warship, and it was damaged and low on ammunition. The Copernicus had its advanced sensors, which were more valuable than any weapon. The Rockhound had its mining lasers and a hold full of volatile ore. The scientists on the other vessels had a wealth of theoretical knowledge, but no practical way to apply it. And the Aurora had 3,000 terrified civilians with nothing but their will to live. What have they got that we do? Dr. Thorne asked, looking at the alien sensor readings. They don't use FTL like we do. They use, I don't know what it is. It's like a folding, a bending of space-time. It's completely different from our jump technology. It's more advanced, more efficient. But it has to have a weakness, I said. They can't be invincible. Their command structure, the captain of the Defiant interjected. That's their weakness. We saw it. When their command ships are thrown off, the rest of the fleet goes blind. They can't coordinate. They're like a hive mind, but without the queen, they're just angry, stupid drones. That was it. That was the key. We couldn't destroy them, but we could decapitate them. We could blind them, and then we could run. We need to find a way to attack their command ships, I said. And we need to do it without getting close enough for them to hit back. We need a long-range weapon. We don't have anything like that, Captain Jack said. We barely have anything that works. I looked at the sensor data from the Copernicus. It was a map of the Chronos system, including a detailed breakdown of the gas giant's volatile atmosphere. There were storms in that atmosphere, massive, planet-wide tempests of lightning and radioactive gas. They were powerful, chaotic, and completely unpredictable. The storms, I said, an idea forming. What if we use them? Dr. Thorne looked at me, a flicker of interest in her eyes. What do you mean? The Copernicus has a powerful radar array, I said. It can map the storms, track their movements. What if we use the rockhounds mining lasers to nudge the storms? Create a chain reaction. You want to weaponize a planetary storm? Dr. Thorne asked, incredulous. That's insane. It's like trying to throw a hurricane at someone. You can't control a hurricane. We don't have to control it, I said. We just have to point it in the right direction. We use the storms as a screen, a distraction. While the enemy is dealing with a giant radioactive hurricane, we hit their command ships. The plan was audacious, a desperate gamble, but it was all we had. For the next week, the fleet worked tirelessly. The Copernicus mapped the Chronos storms, its scientists working day and night to understand their erratic behavior. The Rockhound and its crew carefully adjusted their mining lasers, turning them into a massive, jury-rigged weather control system. The Defiant repaired its damaged systems and prepared for a surgical strike. The civilians on the Aurora did what they could, providing support, medical aid, and even a few makeshift repairs. It was during this frantic work that I finally found the time to grieve. I would steal moments alone in the cold, sterile corridors of the Hellespont array, staring at the hollow of my family. Ilara's smile, the kids' laughter. The life I had known, the life I had taken for granted, was gone. It was a void inside me, a wound that would never heal. But the grief was slowly replaced by a cold, hard anger. The anger of a man who had lost everything. The anger of a species that had been pushed to the brink. It wasn't a hot, blind rage. It was a focused, burning determination. The enemy fleet arrived on the 8th day. A massive armada, thousands of ships, descended upon the Chronos system. They had found us. They were going to finish the job. But we were ready for them. They came in silence. Thousands of them, a glittering, malevolent cloud that filled the blackness around Chronos. Their arrival was a silent scream, a subtle shift in the quantum fabric of the system that our sensors could barely register. They had found us. They were here to finish what they started. I stood in the control room of the Hellespont array, my hands trembling, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The tactical map was a sea of blue-white icons, a suffocating blanket of enemy ships. We were hopelessly outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. By all rights, we should have been terrified, but we weren't. We were furious. The aliens began to deploy, their ships spreading out in a familiar, efficient pattern. They were scanning the system, looking for us. They wouldn't find us. Not yet. The Copernicus had been broadcasting our ghost signal, a phantom fleet that was leading the enemy on a wild goose chase through the gas giant's treacherous rings. It was a magician's trick, a sleight of hand with starships. "They're taking the bait," Dr. Thorne's voice crackled over the comms. "The Phantom Fleet is being engaged. They're sending their screening elements to intercept." "Give them more," I ordered. "Make them think it's a real force. Give them a reason to commit their command ships." The Copernicus and the other scientific vessels increased the power of their signals, creating a massive, blinking phantom of a battle group. The enemy took the bait, committing more of their forces to intercept the fake threat. "Command ships are moving," the captain of the Defiant yelled. "I've got a visual on 3 of them. They're at the rear of the formation, keeping their distance. They're staying out of the fight." "Just as we thought," I said. "They're cautious. They don't like to get their hands dirty." I looked at the Chronos sensor data. The storms were building. The Rockhound had been using its mining lasers to seed the atmosphere with microscopic metallic particles, creating a chain reaction of electrical discharges. The gas giant was alive with lightning, a churning, rolling mass of pure, chaotic energy. "Captain Jax, is the weapon ready?" I asked. "We've been poking this bear for 3 days, Hellespont," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "She's ready to roar." "Then fire," I said. "Give them a show they'll never forget." The Rockhound's mining lasers flared to life, a concentrated beam of searing energy that lanced into the heart of the Chronos storm. It was a spark in a powder keg, a single, deliberate act of chaos. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the planet roared. A massive, spiraling storm erupted from the atmosphere, a twisting, multicolored vortex of lightning and radioactive gas. It was a thing of terrifying beauty, a natural disaster made manifest. It was the most powerful, devastating weapon we had ever created, and it was completely, utterly uncontrollable. But we didn't need to control it. We just needed to point it. The storm was channeled by the Rockhound's lasers, guided by the collective gravity of the fleet. It wasn't a matter of precision. It was a matter of mass. We were throwing a hurricane at the enemy, not a bullet. It was clumsy, inefficient, and completely insane, but it was beautiful. The enemy fleet, spread out in its orderly formation, was caught completely off guard. The storm slammed into their forward elements, a tidal wave of pure elemental force. Shields flickered and died. Ships were tossed around like toys, their crystalline hulls cracking under the pressure. They were an army of ants caught in a tsunami. "Now," I yelled. "Defiant, you are clear. Hit the command ships. Give them everything you've got." The Defiant shot forward, a sleek, silver dart in the chaos. The enemy command ships were trying to maneuver away, trying to escape the storm. But they were slow, clumsy, and their escort ships were being torn apart by the planetary maelstrom. They were sitting ducks. The Defiant unleashed its full complement of torpedoes, a cluster of bright, angry stars that streaked towards the largest of the command ships. The alien vessel's shields flared, desperately trying to stop the attack. But the torpedoes were too many, too fast. They slammed into the ship's hull, a series of brilliant explosions that tore through the crystalline armor. The command ship broke apart, its pieces swallowed by the howling storm. The enemy fleet reacted instantly. A wave of confusion and fear swept through the remaining ships. They were like headless chickens, their formation dissolving. They didn't know what to do. Their commander was gone. They were blind. "Hit the other two," I screamed. "Take them out." But the Defiant had spent its entire payload. It was out of torpedoes. It was defenseless. "Defiant is out of ammo," her captain yelled. "We can't engage. They're regrouping." The enemy was recovering, their ships turning to face the new threat. They had lost one command ship, but they still had two. They were about to bring their full, terrible power to bear on the Defiant. "Do it," I yelled. "The Trojan horse now." The Rockhound jettisoned a massive, hollowed-out asteroid from its hold. It was a fake, a decoy, a bomb. It was the most powerful bomb we had ever created, a fusion device powerful enough to crack a small moon. We had hidden it inside the asteroid, disguised it as a piece of debris. The enemy, blinded by the storm and their panic, didn't even see it coming. It drifted through their formation, a harmless-looking rock in the midst of a battle. "Asteroid is in position," Captain Jack said, arming the device. "Wait," I said, my voice trembling. "We have to make sure the Defiant is clear. They have to get out of the blast radius." The Defiant was running, its engines burning at maximum. The enemy was firing at it, their energy beams lancing through the void. A bolt clipped the Defiant's engine, sending it spinning. "They're hit," someone screamed. "They're going down." "No," I yelled. "Fire the bomb. Do it now." The asteroid detonated. A silent, expanding sphere of white-hot light blossomed in the heart of the enemy formation. It was a sun born in an instant, a micronova that consumed everything in its path. The two remaining command ships were vaporized instantly, their crystalline hulls turned to dust. Thousands of enemy ships were caught in the blast, their shields and hulls evaporating like morning mist. The storm, the bomb, the chaos, it was a perfect, beautiful, horrible storm. The enemy fleet, decapitated and devastated, began to scatter. They were running. They were retreating. They had come to destroy us, and we had made them run. A ragged cheer went up over the comms. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, a release of all the tension and fear and grief. We had won. We had actually won. But the victory was short-lived. The Defiant was listing, its engines sputtering. It was adrift, a broken, burning wreck. "Defiant, come in," I yelled. Status report. There was nothing but static, a long, terrible silence. Then a single, weary voice. It was the captain of the Defiant. We're still here, he said, his voice faint. But we're in bad shape. Life support is failing. We have a hull breach. We need help, we need. His voice was cut off by a violent shudder that shook the entire Hellespont array. The bridge lights flickered and died. The emergency systems kicked in, casting the room in an eerie crimson glow. A proximity alarm blared, its sound a deafening scream. I spun around to look at the main display. It was blank. Then the image flickered back to life, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The enemy hadn't retreated. They had regrouped. A single massive ship had emerged from the chaos of the retreating fleet. It was bigger than anything we had ever seen. It was a mountain of black, crystalline obsidian, a city ship that eclipsed even the Ark Royal. It was the flagship of the Armada, the one that had been hiding, waiting, watching. It was their true command ship, and it was heading straight for us. My God, Dr. Thorne whispered, her voice trembling. They were holding back. They sacrificed their other command ships. They were just bait. It was a trap. Our trap had become their trap. They had let us think we were winning. They had let us destroy their decoys, and now they were going to crush us. The bridge fell silent. The cheers had died in our throats. We had fought, bled, and sacrificed, and it wasn't enough. We were out of plans. We were out of time. Then a new voice came over the comms. It was the captain of the Defiant. His voice was weak, but there was a strange, calm resolve in it. Hellespont, are you seeing this? I see it, I said, my voice hollow. Good, he said. Then you know what we have to do. Don't be a fool, I said. Your ship is dead in the water. You don't have the power. I don't need power, he said. I've got a different kind of fuel, the most powerful fuel in the universe. What are you talking about? He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. You were a cargo router, weren't you, Hellespont? Yes, I said, confused. But what does that have to do with anything? Everything, he said. You know how to get things from point A to point B, that's all I'm doing. I'm taking my ship from point A to point B the most direct route possible. He paused. It's been an honor, Hellespont. You gave us a reason to fight. Tell my family I love them if they're still out there. Wait, I screamed. Don't do this. But it was too late. The Defiant's engine, sputtering and dying, flickered back to life. It wasn't a controlled burn. It was a final, desperate surge of power. The damaged corvette turned, its battered hull pointed directly at the gigantic enemy flagship. It was a tiny, insignificant speck against the vastness of the alien vessel, but it was all we had left. The Defiant shot forward, a silver streak of defiance. The enemy flagship fired on it, a beam of pure energy that should have vaporized it. But the Defiant was too small, too fast. It weaved and dodged, its hull glowing red with the heat of the near misses. It was a dance of death, a final, desperate ballet. And then it connected. The Defiant slammed into the enemy flagship's hull, a tiny, insignificant impact. But it was carrying something else, a fusion bomb. The same type of weapon we had used on the asteroid. The Defiant was the bomb. The explosion was blinding, a silent, expanding sun that engulfed the entire front of the enemy flagship. The crystalline hull buckled and cracked, and the ship began to break apart. It was the final, decisive blow. The enemy flagship, the heart of their fleet, was destroyed. The enemy fleet, its commander gone, its structure shattered, began to fall apart. They were just ships now, alone and terrified. They didn't know what to do. They had been defeated by a species that refused to quit, a species that would sacrifice its last ship, its last person, for a chance to survive. The chaos on the enemy's frequency subsided, replaced by a single, clear transmission. It wasn't a broadcast to any specific ship. It was a simple, repeating message, translated by the Copernicus's universal translator. Retreat, retreat, retreat. The enemy fleet scattered, their ships disappearing into the blackness of space. They were gone. They were retreating. A stunned silence fell over the surviving ships. We had won. We had actually won. And then the crying started, not of despair but of relief. We had survived. The Chronos system was quiet now. The storms that had been our weapon were fading, their terrible energy dissipating into the void. The debris of the enemy fleet drifted in lazy, silent orbits around the gas giant, a graveyard of their arrogance. We had won. We had survived, but the cost was immense. The Defiant was gone. Its captain and crew had given their lives to destroy the enemy flagship. The Aurora, the civilian liner we had tried so hard to save, was a crippled hulk. The Copernicus had lost its primary sensor array. The Rockhound was running on fumes. We were a fleet of 17 ships and we had been shattered, but we were still here, and we were still human. I sat in the control room of the Hellespont array, staring at the hollow of my family. Ilara, the kids, their faces frozen in time, a memory of a life that was gone. I had survived, but what was I surviving for? They were gone. My world was gone. Everything I had known was gone. A knock on the door of the control room startled me. It was Dr. Thorne. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, her face etched with grief. "Admiral," she said, "we've finished the damage assessment. We've lost the Aurora's life support. We're transferring its civilians to the other ships. We're going to have to make some hard choices." I nodded, not looking up from the hollow. "I know." "Admiral," she said again, her voice hesitant, "we've detected something, a signal. It's from New Carthage." My head snapped up. "What? That's impossible. The planet was glassed. There's nothing left." "We thought so too," she said. "But it's there. A repeating signal, a primitive radio transmission. It's weak, barely detectable, but it's there." We gathered in the Copernicus's main lab. A dozen of us, the remnants of the fleet's command. The scientists had patched the signal into the speakers. It was a faint, crackling sound filled with static. And then a voice broke through the noise. "The shelter at Sector 7 remains operational. We have power, we have food, but we are running out of time. The air is getting thin. We are the last survivors of New Carthage. There are 847 of us. Please, is anyone out there? Is anyone listening? Please." The voice was desperate, pleading, a cry for help from the ashes of a dead world. I stared at the speaker, my mind racing. There were survivors. There were people alive, my people. "Is it real?" I whispered. "Or is it a trap, another trick?" Dr. Thorne shook her head. "We've analyzed the signal. It's a civilian frequency. The transmission patterns are consistent with a standard emergency beacon. It's not a military signal. It's a cry for help." A wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, hope, and a terrible, crushing weight. There were survivors, but they were on the surface of a dead world, trapped in a shelter, running out of air. And we were a fleet of 17 broken ships, barely able to keep ourselves alive. "We have to go back," I said. "We have to help them." "Go back," Captain Jack said, his voice incredulous. "We barely got out of that system alive. The enemy could be waiting for us. They could be using the survivors as bait." "It's a risk," I admitted. "But we can't leave them there. They're our people. We don't leave our people behind. That's not what we do. That's not who we are." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. It wasn't unanimous. There were those who were too tired, too scared, too broken, but most of them understood. We had survived because we had refused to give up, because we had been willing to sacrifice, because we had been human. "We don't have the supplies," Dr. Thorne said. "We barely have enough fuel to get to the edge of the system, let alone return to New Carthage." "We don't need to get there in one piece," I said. "We just need to get close enough. We can use the Rockhound's ore hold as a makeshift drop pod. We can get the survivors out." "And what about the rest of us?" Captain Jax asked. "We'll be sitting ducks. The enemy will pick us off one by one." "Maybe," I said, But we've been sitting ducks before, and we're still here. I looked around the room at the exhausted, battered faces of my crew. They were the bravest people I had ever known. They had faced the impossible and won. They had earned the right to be human. "We are the survivors," I said, "the only ones left. We are what's left of the human race, and we are going to show them what that means." And so we went back. We jumped back to the new Carthage system, a fleet of broken ships on a rescue mission. The journey was agony. A slow crawl through the void. Our fuel was running out. Our life support was failing. We were dying, but we were doing it together. When we arrived, the system was a graveyard. The planet was a blackened cinder, its atmosphere choked with ash. The enemy fleet was gone. They had retreated. We were the only ones left. We located the shelter's signal. It was in the ruins of a city buried beneath a mountain of rubble. We lowered a drop pod from the Rockhound, a jury-rigged capsule filled with supplies and rescue equipment. We waited, and we prayed. The first survivors emerged from the rubble, blinking in the dim, ash-choked light. They were pale, thin, and terrified, but they were alive. They were our people. I saw a man carrying a child in his arms, a little girl clinging to his neck. I saw a woman helping an old man, his face etched with exhaustion. I saw a teenager, his eyes wide with shock, carrying a bag of salvaged belongings. There were 847 of them, just as the signal had said. They were the last. And then I saw her. A woman, her hair matted with ash, her face covered in soot. She was holding the hand of a small boy, his eyes wide with fear. She was helping an older woman, guiding her through the rubble. My heart stopped. It was Alara, it was my wife, and the boy was my son. I ran, my legs carrying me through the rubble over the ruins of my city. I called her name, my voice a hoarse scream. She looked up, her eyes scanning the crowd. And then she saw me. A smile broke across her face, a tearful, beautiful smile. She let go of my son's hand and ran towards me. We collided in the ash, our arms wrapping around each other. I held her, sobbing, my face buried in her hair. "You're alive," I whispered. "You're alive." "We're alive," she said, her voice trembling. "We're all alive." I looked at my son, who was staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. I knelt down, opened my arms, and he ran into them. I held him, my son, the one I thought I had lost. I was a complete man again. We loaded the survivors onto the Copernicus. It was crowded and uncomfortable, but it was safe. We had done it. We had saved them. As we prepared to jump away, I sat in the control room of the Hellespont array, looking at the hollow of my family. Alara was sitting next to me, her hand in mine. My son was asleep in my lap. We were a family again. We were a people again. "Do you think they'll come back?" Alara asked, her voice quiet. I looked out the viewport at the ruined planet below. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe, but if they do, we'll be ready. We'll never be afraid again. We'll never be weak again. We are the survivors." I stood up, holding my son in my arms, and walked to the console. I pulled up the fleet-wide comms. Every ship, every human being was listening. "This is the Hellespont array," I said, my voice steady. "This is Admiral Vance's final order. This is the human race's final broadcast." I paused, taking a moment to look at the faces of my crew, my family, my people. They thought they could break us. They thought they could erase us. They sent 9,900 ships to destroy our world, to extinguish our species. And we stopped them with 17. We are not just survivors. We are the future, and we will never be silent again. I took a deep breath. This is humanity. We are still here. We are still fighting, and we are not going anywhere. The fleet began to move, turning its back on the ashes of our old world. We were leaving. We were heading for the unknown. But we were not running away. We were running towards something, toward a new home, toward a new future, toward hope. We are the 17, and we will never be alone.